Welcome to the Projector Planet Podcast, your curated guide to the energy of the week through the lens of astrology and human design. Join fellow projectors and planetary translators Katrina and Liz as we dive deep into the charts to help you understand how the cosmic forecast will affect you. This will allow you less resistance and more flow. Whether you're brand new to planetary transits, a seasoned astrologer, or simply curious about the basics of human design, especially as it relates to projectors, the Projector Planet Podcast is your portal to enlightenment. We invite all like-hearted souls to join us on this adventure in self-discovery. Subscribe now to the Projector Planet Podcast and let us be your guides to a universe of understanding your unique astrological gifts and stepping into your true power according to your design. Welcome back to the Projector Planet Podcast. My name is Liz and I'm here with one of my favorite projectors on the planet, Katrina. And we are doing the second foundational episode for human design. So we just had a big episode where we talked about all of the types and all of the authorities. So we talked about if you're a manifestor or a manifesting generator or a projector or a reflector or a generator. And then we talked about if you have, sacral authority or splenic authority or emotional authority. So if you didn't catch that, definitely go back and listen because those are very foundational parts of your human design. And today we are going to talk about profiles and lines and also the actual energy centers themselves and what it means for things to be defined and undefined. So Katrina, do you have anything that you want to say first?
I was wondering if we covered the not self of each type well enough, just because I know for myself, because I'm a projector and I know when I feel bitter, that's my not self. And so that's a cue for me, like a self-awareness cue for me to check in.
Okay.
And so I just think that might be helpful just to real quickly.
Yes. So manifestors, this is how you know you're like in and out of alignment. So in manifestors, you guys feel inspired, but if you're not self, you feel anger. And for generators, your not self is frustration. For projectors, your not self is bitterness. And for reflectors, your not self is disappointment. And so anytime you're feeling those types of feelings, then you know that you're not in alignment and that it's time to maybe go and do some self-care or really tune back into your authority and tune back into, what do I need to respond to here or what can I do to care for myself at this time?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about the lines so you'll notice when you look on your human design chart that you're going to have two numbers, so it might be like a 1-3 or a 4-6 or I say dash, but it's really like a slash, I guess. Anyway, so those are your lines. And so remember when we talked about how each of the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, which represent archetypes of energy, how they're placed around the zodiac wheel, and that's how we get the defined channels and things in our human design body graph. And so each one of those little gates has it's a different combination of lines of the hexagram, which is actually like codons in our DNA. That's how there's 64 codons in a strand of DNA. And so the 64 hexagrams in the I Ching represent those codons in our DNA.
Interesting.
Yes. And so within each hexagram.
And the I Ching came first, right?
Yeah. Within each hexagram, there are lines. And breaking down the archetype of, say, a gate even more, it moves along like a clock through these lines. And so each line within the gate has a similar type of energy. And so we're going to go through, there's 6 lines. And so each hexagram is made up of 6 6 lines in different combinations of broken and solid lines. So the broken lines are yin energy, the solid lines are yang energy, and there's different combinations for each of the 64. So starting with line 1, the line 1 is a very foundational line. So I should actually start by saying, when we're talking about profiles, there are 12 profiles. So it's a combination of your design and your personality, sun, and that's where the profile comes from. So if you are, lines 1 through 3 are lower trigram lines. And so these lines indicate that you're here to learn from your own experiences and your own inner communications. And lines 4 through 6 are about things you learn through relationships and being out in the world. Most profiles are a mix of both, and it's normal to have like conflict, kind of. It's actually supposed to kind of have conflict between the profiles, so it kind of expands you. And so it's kind of, we're all a mix of some type of like introvert or extrovert energy.
Did you say mine is the 1-3 line?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because my growth has all been internal.
Yes.
Stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And so you learn, through your own inner communications, which makes total sense because you have your defined head in Ajna, and even in astrology, you're have all that Virgo stuff, and so that's a very internal dialogue.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are right angle profiles and left angle profiles, and then there's a juxtaposition profile. And so we'll go through all the profiles, but I want to first go through the lines. And so line 1, and so this is considered like the kind of the floor, the foundation line of the lower trigram. They're very curious. They love to learn. They're introspective. They also have a big fear of the unknown. So these are like your friends that line 1s, like you, Katrina, if you're going somewhere, you're going to be like researching about the place. You want to know all the details. You want to know all the details about everything. Like the internet was like created for you guys.
Yes, it was. It changed my life.
Yes, I'm sure it did. You guys also can struggle a lot with imposter syndrome. And so not feeling like you'll ever know enough for mastery. And so that's like actually one of the big themes in your life is learning that you actually don't have to know enough, that there's never enough. There's never this proverbial, place. It's the journey, it's the climb up the mountain. So, and so sometimes you can hold yourself back for fear of the unknown. And so depending on where you have a line 1, so if the line 1 is first in your profile, so if you're like a 1-3 or a 1-4, then that one line is what you're very conscious of. You're conscious of that energy in
very
yourself.
Much. Mm-hmm.
So so you're you love to research. That's what you said, that you did research for like your whole healing journey was all about.
It's all about research.
Yes.
Yeah. Even at work, my manager was like, "You just want to learn all the things."
Yeah.
Well, I have Pluto in the 3rd house too, but now I know it also comes probably from this one line. So.
Yes. Yep. And so 1 lines are it's a very foundational line. It is, you have to build a foundation, a solid foundation before you can move up in your evolution. Which brings us to line 2. And line 2 is called the Hermit. And in quantum human design, it's called the responder. Human design is shifting in language that it uses, because when it was first originally channeled, it was channeled for people who were, I guess, not as woke. You know what I mean? So it was meant more as like a, kind of a blow to your ego a little bit, to kind of really shed light on who you were. But now, as we want it to be more of an evolutionary tool, we're finding that we need to come up with a little bit more empowering language. So you'll notice that some of the language that we use could be, you might feel like, oh, I don't really like that way that sounds. But it's more meant to represent kind of the shadow side. So at least in the original, quantum human design is much more empowering. So the next line 2 is the Hermit. and they like to be alone. They need to integrate kind of what has happened. They're very sensitive. They need alone time to decompress. But they're designed to be called out by friends. Well, friends will come out of the woodwork, especially after they've had a period of retreat. So as much as they love to be alone, they're designed to respond to the needs of others. But they may be shy. Sometimes you have to go and like find these people. They'll like go like be disappeared for a while, and you're like, my stepson is a line too. And
This is interesting because you told me that Jasmine, my other daughter, the other twin, is a line too.
yeah, she is.
Very much.
Yes.
Yes, very much. What you're saying is very fitting for her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is you see that in her because that's her second. She's a 6'2", if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not something that she's necessarily as conscious of.
She
but
definitely knows she needs her alone time.
Yes, but it's something that you can probably see more of this archetype in her because it's something that's more. Whereas I can't remember if John is a 2-4 or a 4-2, but he also has a 2 line.
Yeah.
But he likes to hermit and go do his little, like, a lot of times hermits will have a like a hobby or something that they do that they always go and do. They like go do their thing. Like for him, it's fishing.
For her, it's art.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they go do their little thing. But yeah, so they, but they may be shy. They may not, if they don't give themselves the alone time they need. It can be rough too. They can get burnt out and things like that. So they really, really need to.
She doesn't get it very much. I mean, she works with kids all day at the daycare. She comes home to her, her partner and her son.
Yeah.
And she doesn't get a lot of that. And yeah, you can tell when she doesn't.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, they definitely line 2s, and that's like I said, depending on where it falls. So this would be for like 2 4s, 2 5s, and then 4 2s. So then we have line 3, and line 3 is the explorer or the martyr. The martyr is the traditional human design language, and they are here to just learn through trial and error. They're here to be experts in what works based on their experience. And so line 3s are going to they just know a little bit about kind of everything, and they need to learn through doing. So your line 3 in your life is like the person that is just making what you would consider all of these errors or lapses in judgment. And it's kind of like watching a car crash and you want to like say something to them, but they're not going to learn that way. They have to learn through that experiment, and it's through experimenting with life, through doing and acting and being a part of, and learning what doesn't work, and learning what makes them hurt, and learning what makes them happy, and through all of these things. And if they want to learn about something, they're going to want to jump right in and be completely enmeshed in it. So.
And this is something, now you said that's so like say mine's a 1-3. So the 3 line would not be something that I necessarily notice about myself right away. That takes a good 30 years.
That's right.
Yeah. That makes sense because that's when I started to realize that in myself was in my 30s.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yep. It's it's very interesting.
We can come across as very self-righteous without even meaning to.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because you want people to kind of see your way too, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So definitely. Anyway, so we're on 4th lines. So 4th lines are kind of considered, they're like the second floor of the house, if that makes sense. And so they also can be a lot like 1 lines in a way, in that they're a foundational line as well. But 4 is called the opportunist. And opportunist, again, that might be a word that might not ring as good to people's ears, but it also in quantum human design, they're the stabilizer or the resource. And so they rely on their networks for their success, basically.
What is your profile?
I'm a 4-6.
John, you and John both have networks like that. That's why I'm kind of
Yes.
laughing a little bit, because you're both that way.
Yes.
That's why I just asked you what yours is, because
Yes.
you do. John has this huge, vast network that
Yes.
he pulls from all the time.
Yep, that's how we get by in our lifetimes. And it's something that I'm very aware of. Like all of my jobs that I've received in my life have been because of people that I've known.
That is super cool that you can see it.
Yep.
I mean, it's so clear. And like we were just had this conversation because Jasmine was saying something about not having many friends, and John's like, I don't either. And I'm like, dude, you have like almost 700 friends on Facebook. He's like, those aren't friends.
That's your network.
That's my network.
That's true, though. That's true. No, that's very true about 4 lines, especially. We have a huge network, but we might only have like a few really close friends, because the thing about 4 lines is we can go very deep with people. We're the type of people that go to a party, we might only meet 2 people, but we know like their whole life story. Like we can just get into it with people, and we make connections very well. Our personalities tend to be very warm and
very much
just
so.
be, just make people feel very comfortable. And so that is very much the 4 line is they're very good salespeople, because they tend to, they can persuade, and they can, it's not even necessarily persuasion, but finding common values with others and demonstrating how that they can help them solve a problem, basically.
See, this is why you guys need to learn this stuff, because as we're having this conversation, I'm relating it back. I mean, John and I just had this conversation the other day about how we don't really argue, because even if we disagree, like there's usually something he says that persuades me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so
him being a 4 and you being a 1, your profiles are very complementary to each other, too.
Yeah, well, but I love that you said that, because we just had that conversation about how we don't hardly ever disagree.
Yeah.
But when we do, it's usually him that can say something that persuades me to kind of come to his side.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. 4 lines are great. And
well, you and John are great. So
well, thanks. My daughter Elena is a 4-6 as well.
The girl that just started at work yesterday, her name is Elena.
Oh, really?
I thought that was so cool. I don't know how it's
okay.
spelled, but yeah, I thought that was cool.
So now we're on to line 5, and line 5s are, it universalizes wherever it is. So they're kind of projection lines. They're very much leadership. They take on leadership roles, but they can project potential out into the world. And so they're very charismatic. But sometimes they try to lead people who are not wanting to be led. And so they tend to be, this is another very persuasive and seductive kind of line. They're very much like the general in the army. They can garner people. It's called the heretic. So, yeah. Yeah, so if you have yourself surrounded by people as a line 5 who don't value themselves, then those people are going to project that onto you and are going to want you to save them. And so like a lot of line 5s will get people they kind of put their expectations onto the line 5, and then if
is Isaac a 5?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
If it doesn't
work
see,
this
out,
stuff works.
I know. If it doesn't work out, then they're also the scapegoat. You know what I mean? So, they have a fear of being misunderstood. It could cause them to hide out. Sometimes they'll hide out even better than hermits will. But one of their biggest things for line 5s is healing their own self-worth and stop falling in love with people's potential. Because they can see potential in anything, really. They can see, if you think a leader, you're looking for potential in your people that you're leading.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes they can project that potential onto people, and the people are like, whoa. I'm not ready for all that, man. Like, you know what I mean? So they it could be very hard on the line 5 if they're trying, because they just have this natural wanting to lead. And so if they're not able to lead, or if the people that are they're trying to lead don't want to be led by them, it can cause a lot of turmoil in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of the line 5. And the line 5 is kind of, it's it's considered kind of the top of the house, because when you get to the 6th line, you're also looking forward into the 1 line of the next hexagram. So line 6 is the role model, or the adept, and so they have a triphasic life cycle. So 6 lines have 3 phases. The first cycle is from birth to your first Saturn return, and during that time you act like a 3rd line. The second cycle is sometimes known as being like on the roof, or aloof and on the roof. And it's basically, this is your time to heal. You're watching and learning and seeing how others do it and integrating what you learned in the first phase. So it's kind of more of an autopilot phase. I'm in that phase. I'm coming toward the end of that phase, but I've been in it since my early 30s. I can see it absolutely clearly. That I was way out and traveling and doing all of these things. Not to say that I don't do that now, but now I have my home, I have my little nest that I don't, I mean, and, well, let's be serious, like nobody leaves their homes anymore for a lot of things. So, but you know what I mean? I settled down, I had children, and I've been in a kind of very deep healing and integration for the last 10 years or so of my life. And then when you're about 30 to 45, you start to feel like a sense of urgency that you're here for a reason or a purpose. And then at 50, you enter the final phase, where you have integrated and healed from everything you've learned, and where now people call on you to be the mentor, the wise sage. And it's different from a leadership. It's more of like, you're like kind of like an oracle. Like, people come to you.
That makes so much sense with the number 6, even.
Yes.
If you know what the number
Yes.
6 represents, like in numerology. That completely.
Yeah, so it's very much, on the shadow side, these people can be very fearful of failing in their mission. You know what I mean? They sometimes need to be a little bit less serious. They need to play a little bit more. Think about both of your 6 line daughters. They have some, and I have a 6 too as well, and my stepdaughter. They can be kind of serious people in a way.
I would say more so Jade than Jasmine. Jasmine is pretty playful.
Yeah.
She can be.
Well, she's got that artsy side.
So I was gonna say, she can be pretty playful. She loves to laugh. Like, we joke a lot. Like, her and Tana have very similar laughs, and we love it because they'll be like in another room and you'll hear. And it's just contagious, you know. Jasmine loves to play. She's always playing with Zale. They're always laughing. Like, Jade, on the other hand, is very, very serious, very stern. Yeah. It's so funny that they're twins and they're so different, you know?
Well, it has a lot to do with the difference in time between their births.
Yeah,
because,
26 minutes for them.
Yeah, so that's kind of a longer time, and it actually advanced the line in their profile. So Isaac is also a twin, but he and his twin are only like 6 minutes apart. So there's no line. It does break down to differences when you go into the lines more, because even within each line there's like little mini lines, and it goes into mini line, you know what I mean? Like, it could get smaller to like a atom, you know. And so, but he and his twin are both 5-1s. But with your girls being a 6-2 and a 6-3, there is a huge difference.
Oh,
there.
Huge. I mean, and it's just so funny that the daughter, the Jade, the one that has the 3, is the one that's the martyr, like me.
Yeah.
And she is like totally going down the same path I went down. It's so enlightening in a way, you know. As frustrating and triggering as it's been hugely enlightening.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the line. So when you look at your profile, you are a combination of those 2 types of energies. So, and there's 12 different combinations. So the most rare combination is a 4-1. And that's what's called a juxtaposition profile. That profile actually has more of like a fixed destiny, as well as like 6 lines also tend to have more of a fixed destiny. Actually, 5 and 6 lines do, because they just have this. It's the leadership and the wise sage thing. Like they are kind of going to be expected to fulfill this higher mission of sorts.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah. So,
well, the wise sage 6 can guide that 5.
Oh yeah.
And free them. 5 is a little bit about freedom, so free them from that tendency you were talking about to put that potential
Yes.
on other people. Now, if there's somebody that's willing and they have that potential, that's a beautiful, great, go
It
there.
is.
But I feel like that makes complete
It can
sense
be,
what you said.
yeah, with 5 lines, it's almost like, because they can see the potential so much that it's overwhelming to the people that they see the potential in. And so they're like, kind of like, oh my God, you're trying to like do all these things, or you see this big vision, and oh, I don't know. And so, yeah, it can be hard for 5 lines.
Well, I think a lot of us struggle to recognize our own potential.
Oh, definitely.
And so if you have somebody like, seeing all this stuff in you and you're going, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to buck up against. That's why it's so important. Your network is just so important. I mean, even in human design, if you think we're electromagnetically connecting with other people, like what traits and what connections are you actually making with people, and what's that bringing out of you? What kind of energy is that bringing out of you? So moving on though I want to get into the chart a little bit and move on to the actual centers. So when we talk about the chakras, the traditional chakra system in like the Hindu chakra system, there was originally 7, and which were the head, ajna, throat, heart, solar plexus, sacral, and root. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the original foundational episode, back in 1781, there was a split that split the heart into the G and the identity, or the will center, and then it split the solar plexus into the spleen and the emotional solar plexus. And so when we look at the charts, we're going to see you're going to have some openness and some definition. Unless you're a reflector, then you don't have any definition. Your chart is completely open. But you'll notice that each center is either defined or open or undefined. And so defined energy is sourced within you, and it's consistent, and it is what you are here to give the world energetically. It's more of like a fixed element. I mean, not to say that it doesn't have needs, and it can't evolve, but it's just more contained energy. And like I said, it's what you're here to transmit out to the world. It gives clues as to your purpose and how you interface and create. So like when you're first looking at your chart, you should be really looking at your defined centers and so it's like what am I broadcasting out? So my 2 defined centers are my root center and my spleen center, and the rest of my chart's undefined. So really studying those 2 centers is a lot about, this is who people see me kind of as.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. It will make sense in my chart too, because like all of this is defined.
Your head, yes.
And people do know me as somebody who talks and communicates and writes and
yes.
Do you know what I mean?
And you have a defined throat, which is sometimes confusing because people think that projectors can't have defined throats, and they do, because it's about having a motor to your throat. Which you don't have a motor, you have your G center going to your throat. So you really speak from your heart.
I do, yeah.
Which
I've had to learn
that it's okay, because it's hard when you speak from your heart, because anything that people say against it can be very painful.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, but just learning not to take things personal has been hugely helpful. But yeah, I like that you're saying that, like what And it's funny because like you having that defined root center, I wonder what that's like. Because I feel like that would be great.
It's
I don't
helpful.
have that, so
It helps me push through. Um, and so each of our centers, they get conditioned, either regardless if they're defined or undefined. They're subject to conditioning. The undefined ones are subject to more conditioning than the defined ones. But we talk about, and Karen Curry Parker talks about, that there's like 5 types of conditioning. We have conditioning in just the openness of our center, which can create predictable behavior patterns, mistaken motivations in relationships, and that because that's energy that comes in. My dog just came in and he's being beggy. um, um, that is energy that comes in from other people's charts. And so, like, when you have an open center and you live in a family and you live, with somebody that may have that center defined, you tend to take on the traits of that center because just from being in proximity to people that have definition in the center. Another way we get conditioning is through imprinting from our family of origin. Like I just mentioned, with our parents having certain definition that we don't, would be part of our imprinting. Generational energy patterns. We inherit our human design from our grandparents, and so our children inherit their human design from our parents, so that we keep having the same intergenerational dynamic that is continuing until we break certain cycles and certain patterns, and it's meant to do that so that we will, if that makes sense.
No, completely. My daughter and I just had a conversation. She was talking about yesterday how, because she listens to a lot of like the gentle parenting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I didn't break the cycle early, but I broke the cycle. And so it's almost like she's continuing that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so she was talking about how she catches herself sometimes like getting ready to yell at her son, and then she's like, I can't even do it because it's so like ingrained in her now that like everything that she does is going to affect him. Do you know what I mean? In some way. And so so that's interesting. I'll have to go back and see if there's any like what my mom's is versus my kids and stuff like that, because and all of my kids definitely have some traits of my mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my mom is a 1-4 profile, and my daughter Emmy is a 1-3, and Elena is a 4-6. So like they both have that 1 and the 4. My mom's a manifesting generator. Emmy's a manifesting generator. And this is another thing I noticed with my own grandmother. So like I told you that and it's more your maternal grandmother, obviously, because that's where imprinting comes from. If you're a little egg inside your mother who was inside your grandmother, that makes sense, right? And so my maternal grandmother was a reflector, if I have her birth time right. If not, she was a projector, but she has very similar design to me, just the 2 lower centers and the rest open. And then I looked up my cousin, who's also born to my grandmother's daughter, and she's also a projector.
Interesting.
And and I'm sure if I looked at my other female cousin who was born to my mother's, or my grandmother's other daughter, that she would also be a projector. So it definitely checks out as far as that goes. And then also, we have genetic imprinting. So obviously the protein codes of our epigenetics, and then, we can actually, they're proving now that we can change those and change some of how our DNA and our cells express. And a lot of human design is a lot through language that we do that with, and how certain words vibrate higher, and how that's why, affirmations and things like that work, and meditation works and things like that, because you're using sound to change your brain waves.
This is so in line with my Aquarius energy, wanting that intellectual understanding.
Yes.
And we're getting that as well now, that scientific intellectual kind of backup of what we already experience spiritually. And that's what I've had to do. It's been through words. It's been through how I speak to myself. It's been through what I tell myself. It's been through meditation those are all exactly how I changed my life. So that
They've
completely
done
makes
so
sense.
many studies, and in fact, Karen Curry Parker, her whole PhD dissertation is on language and how it affects cells and its impact on cells. I mean, if you think about it, they've done studies like with water, where the one water was being talked to terribly, and the other one was being told that it was beautiful, and just the cells expressed completely differently. The one that was in pain, you could tell in the water. You could tell the way that the cells fractaled out. So think about it. We're water, 70% of our bodies. And so when we're talking to ourselves and those sound waves are coming out and hitting our auric or our energy field, it's doing something to our cells. And so even talking and, and it's hard because we are programmed to believe everything, to look at the negative of everything, and to have that be our default, to try to protect ourselves from pain. And so human design is really about rewriting your story and understanding what you need to know about yourself so that you can feel good about who you are and know that your design is just a piece in a greater puzzle of the collective, and is needed and is beautiful and is valid and needs to be here and share their experience and live and expand and really live to the fullest.
Well, they've done those studies on plants as well. Same thing.
Yeah.
Right? And just knowing, I mean, if you're somebody like me who leans more intellectual and you want the logic of it, I mean, that's there too, like she's saying. It's, how I used to speak to my kids versus how I speak to them now.
Yes.
That you can see that difference. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not even just in how we speak to ourselves. It has to start there, because honestly, whatever we have internally, that's what's going to come out.
Yep.
And so it definitely starts with how you speak to yourself and being kinder to yourself and finding compassion for yourself. And then once you can do that, you change how you're speaking to other people. It's a total game changer.
Yeah.
It definitely elevates. I mean, my relationships today are very different than they were 10 years ago. Do you know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
yeah. They call it spelling for a reason.
Yes. So there are 9 energy centers. So we have one manifestation center, which is the throat. And that's kind of like all the roads lead to Rome. It establishes the context for discussion of the 9 centers. It's kind of the town square of human design. So all energy is like wanting to get to the throat. And so when your throat is activated, that kind of gives you a voice to manifest. And like I said, it's what differentiates us as humans. Then we have 2 pressure centers. We have the head center and the root center. So these move energy toward the awareness centers. So it's the pressure to know and as well as the pressure to do. So it's like the pressure to like your head, the pressure to think, and then your root is the pressure to get up and go and like get out of danger, like get out of harm's way. It's driving. That root pressure is like your adrenal pressure, and so it's driving energy to all the other pressures, or to all the other centers. Then you have 3 awareness centers. The 3 awareness centers are the ajna, the spleen, and the solar plexus. And the solar plexus acts both as an awareness and as a motor. And so each focuses on and interprets experiences as body, mind, or spiritual awareness. So upon like reaching the throat. So like spleen communicates, it's like survival awareness. And then your ajna is your mental awareness, and your solar plexus is like your spiritual or your creative awareness. And then we have 4 motor centers, and we're going to talk about one of them, like I said, twice. So the root is a motor, or a couple of them actually, twice. The root is also a motor. It's like their fight or flight. So it's an on-off motor. It's either on or it's off. It's not like a continuous motor like a sacral motor would be. Like I said, next is the sacral motor, and that's like your life force energy. So manifesting generators, you have your sacral motor defined. You just have the energy to go, go, go until you can't go anymore, which God bless you. Kudos to you people. I mean, that's, I love it. But, and then you have the heart center, which is another motor, which is the I, me, willpower. And then you have your identity or your G center, which is home to we only have one of these. And that's home to what's called the magnetic monopole, which is like what projects our identity out and our direction in life. And it also is what pulls life toward us. So it's kind of like if we look at ourselves as electromagnetic beings, our magnetic monopole is like our magnet, kind of our magnetic center that probably pulls us to the ground too, because they said that the Earth, they've discovered, also has a very strong magnetic monopole in the middle, and that's what's our magnetic monopole within us is pulling us to the Earth and pulling things into our field based on our vibration.
I'm just telling you, this stuff works. Even if you never study human design, the fact of the matter is your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs are what create your reality.
Yeah.
It's what pulls, like you said, it's what draws. And this isn't to say, I mean, every bad thing that happens, you've pulled that to yourself. No, because there's other factors to factor in. But there are so many times in my life where, and I'm sure in yours, where I can feel like, wow, I kind of attracted that to my life based on where I was at that time in my mindset.
Definitely. So I want to start out by talking about the throat, just because, like I said, the throat is really what makes us human and what differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. And so it's associated with, teaching, knowledge, education, leadership. It's associated with the thyroid and parathyroid. It's endocrine glands responsible for metamorphosis and transformation. It oversees metabolic processes, how we burn energy, whether we're fast or slow, fat or skinny, etc. Like, this is all thyroid. I mean, there's a whole bunch of hormonal processes going on that originate from the throat. And so it's it determines like when we should speak and also when we should be silent. And so the problem, and people are like, well, why don't I have a defined throat? I wish I had a defined throat. And actually 72% of the population has defined throats. And so we assume we express exclusively from our mind what we communicate, but it's really about the gates around the throat is how we express. And those are coming from all different centers. In fact, there's only 3 that are coming from our ajna, or mind processing center. And so the throat is directly connected to the ajna, the solar plexus, the heart, the G, the sacral, the spleen. There's all, like I said, all roads lead to Rome. And so you have all of these differing energies with differing motivations trying to get to the throat so they can talk. So 72% of the population has a defined throat, and those with defined throats can always do or manifest, but that doesn't mean that they should. Defined throats can be impulsive, they can talk too much, they can do too much, they can give their energy away to impulse. What is expressed and how it's expressed depends on, like I said, what center is leading to the throat. But they have this consistent cadence or confidence about their voice. They can make other people move. They can be great storytellers. They also have very strong opinions. People also love to talk to people with defined throats. Like, you'll notice if you have a defined throat, people will just come up and want to, they love to, especially us undefined throat people, we love to be in the energy of a defined throat because it makes us able to kind of talk.
Well, it's like
more.
you were saying, you absorb.
Yes,
you absorb that.
and expand. So, expression of strong opinions, I think I already said that. And so, yeah, people love to talk to you. If you have an undefined throat, you may be trying to attract attention and afraid that you won't be noticed. You may struggle to be heard, struggle to express yourself. Most undefined throats can be kind of chatterboxes too. It's kind of a low expression, but so there's not really a lot of consistency. You might have like lots of different answers to the same question. You could also have speech impediments, but on the flip side, undefined throats can be fabulous singers as well because they can match their cadence to other, you know what I mean? Like
Oh,
if
that
I
makes
have a
sense.
defined, undefined throat, I can do all kinds of voices, chap. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I can,
like, well, you sing really well,
and
so.
I can match my voice to different things. Whereas defined throats have more of a shorter bandwidth that they can.
Oh, that's true because I
within.
can only sing certain songs.
Exactly. Well, I didn't know that. I was just saying. Like,
No,
exactly.
I'm just letting you know that that's on the money. Because my daughter even asked me the other day, I came in singing, and she's like, Mom, you sounded so great. She was like, that was a total 80s vibe. And then she asked me if I would sing a worship song, which I kind of was like, okay. But she said, I have to think of which one. Do you know?
Yeah,
because she knows like there's just going to be certain ones that I'm going to
that
sound really good on,
right.
and I can't reach these high notes or you know what I mean? So
yes,
yeah.
So if you have an undefined throat, silence is golden. You know, and when you exercise patience, you can really it can really be transformative. So not speaking out of turn. If you do speak out of turn, that could tend to strain your voice. People want to talk because talking relieves energy. It's moving energy around, and so they want to talk to relieve pressure. But if you have an undefined throat, you kind of can tend to spend a lot of energy trying to figure out what to say or where should I go or is anyone noticing me, and so that's just something to be mindful of when you have undefined throat. So like I said, there's lots of gates that come out of the throat, and we're not going to get into all the gates because that would be a very, very, very long thing because there's 64 of them. But it will tell you a lot as you start to learn about human design, what gates are activated, which I only have one active gate to the throat, which is the gate of privacy.
But what does that mean since your throat is undefined and it's the gate of privacy?
Right. So it means that what I need to be sharing actually is people's stories and lessons from the past. So I'm very good at gathering stories and gathering experiences, and that's and I should be sharing them, but knowing when to share them and not just like putting up somebody's business all out there. But when I do share at the right time, and it's more like because I have to still follow my strategy, which is to be invited to share, then it could be very transformational.
No, it was beautiful. Well, the day we went to the psychic fair and we sat outside and you were telling me the story of people in your family.
Yeah.
And that led to a whole thing
Yeah.
about like prestige and that's definitely that's pretty good.
So let's move on. Let's move back to the top of the chart because so many people spend so much time here, which is the head. And so this is a pressure center, like we mentioned, and it's always like trying to seek inspiration or like, what should I be thinking about? Okay. So it's related to the pineal gland. It regulates flow between the gray matter and the neocortex. And it's all about inspiration. And it's not inspiration that's meant to lead to action, but to lead to conceptualization. So people think we think that we should be making decisions from our head, but we're not supposed to. Our head is just for dreaming. It's for dreaming and noticing patterns, and it's not really for like figuring out life's problems, because if you're figuring things out or trying to work and figure, you're actually just expelling energy either into the future or into the past and trying to work out things. Whereas if you create what more of an open channel for inspiration and aren't always in your head, then you will get a lot more inspiring things to be able to come through.
Well, and Aries rules the head in astrology.
Yeah.
And Aries is inspiration.
Yeah.
And right now, like as we said earlier, as we're recording, there is a full moon in Aries where, just real quick, because this is about human design, but this is really about getting out of your head. This full moon is really about the sovereignty you really have over your own life based on what you allow yourself to think, and going along with those inspired feelings, like you're saying, versus overthinking it, versus the
Yes.
analysis paralysis. This is really about, where am I inspired to move right now,
Yes.
and not overthinking it.
Based on your body and not your head, because your head only can conceptualize what it knows or has seen before based on like past experiences. So you'll notice that in the human design, your head is not connected to the throat directly. It has to go through the ajna, through the processing center. So it doesn't even make sense for us to, there's only 3 channels that connect the head to anything, whereas the rest of the body graph is like all interconnected to each other. And so, the head is really, we spend so much time there, but it's really should be playing a much smaller role, because we really should be focused on being in the present moment. And when you're in your head, you are either trying to play out future scenarios, or you are trying to solve things from past experiences, and controlling, what we just talked about, codependency, trying to
Oh
create,
my gosh,
create
yes, yes.
solutions for problems that haven't even happened yet.
Yeah. And I think, the head is useful sometimes. Like, if I'm feeling something and it's not necessarily a good feeling, I can bring the logic in a little bit there, to help me come out of that. But overall, I completely agree with you that it's really about, how do I feel in this moment, and going with what you feel.
Yes.
Because, like you're right, the head is nothing more than, like, it's going to try to protect you.
Yes.
Even from good things.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Or lizard brain.
Yeah. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So the defined head. So 30% of the population have a defined head, you included. And that's a consistent mental pressure to ask and answer questions, as well as grasping and understanding human consciousness. It's under pressure to think all the time. You can be intrinsically inspired, which is pretty awesome, as well as you can inspire others. But because the head has no access to a motor, your thoughts are really not meant to lead to any manifestation. It's like, the whole thing with manifestation is like that your thoughts create. It's not. It's your feelings. It's your emotional waves. That's sending out the wave. It's not your thoughts. So, but it can turn in this mental pressure inward, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, depression. So if you attempt to relieve this pressure through action, the result will likely be hasty and incorrect decision. So we're just like doing things impulsively because you thought of something that's causing you pressure to act. Don't do that.
No, I would say she's right on point. What I've been doing lately, when we talk about manifestation, I think it's overplayed sometimes, the way that it's misunderstood. But what I tend to do is, I will turn on a frequency, and I will sit and close my eyes and just make myself feel. It's about feeling, right?
Yes.
So if this is what I'm trying to manifest, how would I feel if I had that right now? Do you know? You really get into that and just envision it, and let your body like feel. What would it feel like? Say you're trying to attract more money or whatever it is. How would it feel not to have to struggle? How would it feel to be able to go buy whatever you wanted, or help whoever needed help, or, and get yourself in that vibration of feeling.
Yes.
Because that's, again, what we're emitting out into the universe, and how we pull things magnetically toward us. So it's all about feelings.
Yes, it is. Yeah, the defined head person, they can be sometimes maybe closed-minded a little bit. Like, they can be just, my way is the right way. They don't have the huge bandwidth to be able to, it takes them a while to integrate higher levels of thinking that weren't already in their schema based on their experience. So, not to say that they can't, expand, they can, but they're not who you would consider to be like traditionally an open-minded person, like you would somebody with an open or undefined head.
Which makes sense, because ours is already full, so we can't really, we don't have room to like an undefined would have,
because you're too busy transmuting out from that defined
to
head.
take in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so an undefined head is 70% of the population. So they have no consistent way of thinking or discerning mental information. Um, they may have like meaningless questions, and they're constantly seeking questions to or answers to questions that like don't even matter. Oh my god, I can see this so much. I could just go down rabbit holes of things that, and I have an undefined head and ajna, and that I'm like, why do I even, or like I'll start to like be typing out this big old thing, and I'll be like, I actually don't even care about this. I mean, and so we can get, when we get into that, like I said, it's a pressure center, so it's you can get a pressure to want to try to answer questions. You can easily get caught in trying to solve other people's problems if you have an undefined head. The need to want to find the answer makes it hard to like get things out of our heads. And then, so you got to refuse to act out of mental pressure. And then sometimes people with undefined head and ajna, it manifests in one of two ways. You're either like the type of person who like truly is kind of empty. Now I don't want to say empty-headed, but you can be kind of absent-minded, I guess, and you're the type of person that loses your keys or loses this or has forgets what they're going to do in the next room, or it can manifest as like a super duper photographic memory, where you have this amazing like just huge amounts of information in your brain that's like been dumped in there and stayed kind of, and so it kind of can manifest in one of those. You can either be like total space cadet, or you could be like on the spectrum and know like all of this, know like all the stats for every NFL team in history, or you know what I mean, something like that. So with the undefined head, it just again, you can actually read people's minds with this undefined head, because you're picking up on people's thoughts and feelings and everything like that. So it is very able to, like Isaac and I both have undefined heads, and so I can like almost hear his thoughts sometimes, like, or we'll just be going along, and I'll think of I'll think of his dad for some reason in my mind, and he'll be like, I think I'm gonna call my dad tomorrow, or like, you know what I mean?
That's
like,
so cool.
All the time that happens, and so it's because I'm picking up on his thought from his head, and he does the same for me too. He'll literally like verbalize something that I just thought of too. Like he does it all the time. So like I said, these people love to be inspired, but they don't have necessarily the internal inspiration. They need like external inspiration, but they are easily inspired people. And then they tend to be like open-minded and open thinking toward things, and can look at like all sides of an issue and all sides, which it's good that 70% of people in the world
good.
are like that.
And just, if you are somebody like me with the defined, like, it doesn't mean you're never going to be open-minded, right? Like, the work can be done.
No, of course.
And then you can use that defined head, for a better purpose. But so it's, I wonder what John's is, just because I feel like, because you were talking about picking up on I feel like he does that more than me, but I don't know if he has a defined head or not.
He has an open head.
I was going to say, because there's so many times where he will say something that I was just thinking, or he will it's almost like he just reads my energy or my thoughts like just incredibly well.
Yep.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yep, open head.
It's more so on his side, and that's why I wondered, because
he only has, so it's easy to remember his chart. He only has 3 centers defined, and they're right down the middle. So it's throat, G, and sacral. He has a really awesome design, actually.
He's a really awesome person.
But the undefined spleen I found it can be a problematic thing, but we'll get to that. Let's move on. So like I said about the head, it's just pressure to try to figure out stuff, and you don't need to do that. Let's move on to the ajna. Now the ajna is sometimes called like the third eye, the neocortex, the visual cortex, the pituitary gland. It's like your consciousness. It sends messages to your thyroid. And so this gate kind of takes the information from your head and makes sense of it all, and then distributes it out to the throat. And so it's so people, depending on which gate or channel you have defined, if you have a defined ajna, that means that you have your throat is going to also have an activation, because that's the only thing that it hooks to, and the head. So, and then also it should be noted, if you have a defined head, you definitely have a defined ajna. That's like you have to, because there's those channels are the only ones there. So, but you can have an undefined head with a defined ajna, but you cannot have it the opposite. So you can't have a defined head and an undefined ajna.
Oh, interesting.
So the defined ajna is about 47% of our population, and so they conceptualize the same way every time. So defined ajna's minds are like a data hub. Their minds are like predetermined by the gates and channels, and they aren't necessarily easily influenced by others. May find it difficult to meditate because they can't control mental activity, can create headstrong tendencies, can waste energy obsessing, especially about things they deem too simple. Yeah, which I think is interesting. And so, like I said, this ajna is like how we process our thoughts, and how we then communicate those same thoughts to the throat. So the undefined ajna is 53% of the population. So if the ajna is undefined, the head is also undefined, like I mentioned. They have open and flexible minds. It is a sign of mental intelligence. It can be indicative of great thinkers have open ajnas, because they have multiple different ways of processing things. And they can sift through details and find what really matters, and then picking up on thoughts and ideas that others are thinking, but also they can get into pretending to be certain about things when they're really not. And then feeling like you have to have the right answer. That's a very big thing with undefined ajnas, is they think that because you have to have, if you only have one part of like a gate, say it's like the gate of youthful folly, which comes off the ajna up into the head. So you are formulating an answer and you want to find the answer, but the answer has to be with, like any scientific process, it has to be hypothesized and tested and everything like that. It's not just the answer that you come up with. And so if you're missing on the testing part of the thing, you might just be spewing out answers all the time if they're right or wrong or whatever, just to feel the pressure that you need to answer the question. So that was kind of a long way of
So with the undefined, there's more of a pressure to answer the questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Because it's, anytime you have something undefined, it's kind of like all over the place in a little way. It's whereas you're more, when you have a defined ajna, you're more worried about what you're kind of putting out, whereas undefined, you have all this stuff coming in, and so you're feeling all this pressure from all these different places to be right or to answer questions, or I see it a lot.
So this is very enlightening. I'm about to use this information in my life.
Oh, well, good. So next, let's go down to the G center. So that sits right below the throat, because we already talked about the throat. And so the G center is, I'm trying to find my notes, here it is. The G center is associated with love, identity, direction. Like I said, it's the seat of our magnetic monopole. So it's like where our big magnet is, our heart. It came from our heart. Associated with the liver and blood. It determines the health of the blood. So this is why we know that alcohol destroys the liver and robs us of our identity. So every gate is represented in the G center. So every gate that is in the G center touches a astrological sign in the zodiac. So everything comes back to that, if that makes sense. Like certain centers, like say the spleen center, those are like fear gates. Those are more heavy, like in Scorpio energy, and just different things like that are more like spleen gates. Whereas like head gates are all like Mercury or
Right.
Virgo energy. But the G center actually touches all of the zodiac because it's about self love and it's about, your creative direction. It's the gate of the there's like the listener, the um, your love of yourself, your love of your body, your love of humanity. So your G center is very, very important in human design. It's really your calibration center, and studying it is how you learn kind of to love yourself, I guess. So, you know, if you have this defined, then you have a defined direction in your life. Like you are very aware that you have kind of this path that you're walking, and you're have a very strong kind of sense of yourself and who you are.
John definitely has that.
Uh-huh. You do too.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
I mean, I've always felt like I've like destined to walk a certain path, even if I didn't know what the path was. But John very much.
Isaac does too.
Does he? Yeah. Okay.
And so, with this defined, it's believing that you're going to be accepted for who you are, or have you been forced to hide your identity because you didn't feel safe? And so, you can use a lot of I am affirmations around deconditioning the G center, like around, like I am, love, or I forgive, I trust, I trust my body, I receive. All of those are, very self-love gates. So when you have an open G center or an undefined G, you can see other people's direction, but you may not feel like you have a necessary direction that you're going. And so it can be very difficult for people with undefined G's because you feel like you don't necessarily know what is right for you all the time, or it's like you can see other people's potential and path and what they should do with their lives very clearly, but you don't necessarily see it for yourself, which is why people with undefined G's make very good like coaches and guides.
I was going to say maybe that is the path.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
is.
For an undefined G is
to be more
yeah.
to help other people, which if you look at overall design, you'll find like a lot of projectors have undefined G's, even though you have a defined G, but it's just two perspectives to the same kind of, guiding energy. Because it's not to say that people with defined G's, they're more able to get people to follow them down their path, if that makes sense. Like, so you have this direction that you want, and you can garner other people to rally around that and help you along the way. Whereas undefined they're maybe one of the helpers for the defined person.
Okay. That makes sense.
But your G center and your self-love is very important. It's like this should be the center that everybody kind of focuses on first, and focuses on the gates in that center, what you have defined in those gates, and that'll really kind of see where you can work on, self-love. Because the more you love yourself, the higher you vibrate, and the more the more you transmit out things that will bring things back to you in the physical.
And the more you intentionally do this work, the easier it becomes. I mean, there was a time in my life where I had zero self-love, you know? And it's so funny because, like, my daughter will say to me now, like, Mom, you have so much confidence. And here I am older, and, like, all these things that I could be so insecure about. And don't get me wrong, it enters your mind sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. But I've just trained my self to know, to pick up those things so that I'm not stewing on them, so that I'm not, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And look, I'm gonna tell you, like, this is my life, and I am gonna build a life that I feel good in. And that means you can come or you don't have to.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so the self-love is so important. even if you just start with self-acceptance or tolerating the different versions of yourself and work your way up to self-love. But I agree with you that that is somewhere that everyone should start.
Yes. So moving on, so when they had the split in the heart center, it turned into the G center that we just talked about, and then what's known as like the will center, or sometimes called the heart center in human design. And this is where our willpower and ego may sit. Those who are unaware of how this center operates can find themselves more prone to diseases of the heart and digestive system. It rules like the stomach, the thymus, the heart, and the gallbladder. And so it's all about resources and being in control of things in your life. And it's actually because of certain planetary transits, it's more undefined now than it was in the past. So it's more likely, but you have actually a defined heart or a defined will center. But most people being born are undefined. And so defined are about 37% of the population. You like to be in control of your life and your resources. This includes like what you wear, where you work, and how you shape your life. You can have an inflated opinion of yourself sometimes. It's healthy for you to exercise your willpower though. Usually you're very like clear with your word, and if you make commitments, you stick to them. You do enjoy working, but you prefer more entrepreneurial work. Can get carried away and be too forceful, and can pump others up and sometimes push them to perform beyond capacity. So that would be a defined will. It's a very much a go, 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 get 'em kind of hustle. It's like and it can fight with you, like you have an undefined sacral, so you're like, I don't have the energy to hustle. But it's more about what you're, if you stick to something or if you make a commitment to something, you're not like, you have the willpower to follow through with the commitment for the most part.
I mean, yeah, it's especially more so, I would say, as I age than when I was younger. I think I let the spleen went out a little bit there. But I think a part of that, too, has just been learning what to commit to and what to not commit to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you have this undefined, that's 63% of people, you're not designed to be willful and competitive, but you need to find the courage to exercise your will. So when you ask yourself questions like, why can't I be this, or why can't I be like that, it all goes back to this, that we should be doing something all the time. I think that's why that we're moving away from having these defined wills, is because there's so much propaganda around like what should we be doing, and it kind of inundates our reality, reminding us that we always need to be like sexier and smarter and more successful, and it's kind of like trying to like live up to unrealistic expectations when you have this undefined will, because all of those things are like reminders that you don't have willpower, that you're not, you know what I mean?
That's interesting. So having a defined will, then, would that mean that's why it's hard for me to let myself just relax?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I feel like I always have to be doing something that's productive.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so, yeah, undefined wills can be problematic, because you can really, when you don't have the willpower or you make too many promises, that's really what it is you're making promises you can't keep. Promises to yourself, promises to other people. And so when you can't keep your promises and you don't have the willpower to sustain what you've promised, then you get down on yourself, and that really can be a huge blow to your self-esteem, is because you're not keeping your word to yourself. And so it's just really important for people with undefined wills to not take on too much, to not make promises that they can't keep. You don't have anything to prove. You don't have to prove your worth to anybody. So yeah, you really just need to know your inherent you're inherently worthy and not feel like you have to be just like doing something. But you said you feel like you have to be doing something with a defined will too.
Oh, I do, and I think part of that's what's astrology with Saturn conjunct my moon in Virgo, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
I do, and it's in my second house of self worth, and so that combined probably with the defined will is not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's move on to the sacral. So the sacral is an important energy center as well because it's like our life force energy. It's where we get our fertility, sexuality, our vitality, our responsibility. It corresponds to like our sex organs, the ovaries and testes. All life on the planet is fostered by life force energy. I mean, generators are really technically the ones that are supposed to be like having the most children, and they're supposed to be generating new life, and so but if you don't engage the center, it will atrophy. And so its power can either be regenerative or degenerative. And so the sacral center capacity peaks at age 18 in men. Lucky them. And in 33 to 35 in women. And so it's all about, and there's tons of activations in the sacral. Like when you look at your human design body graph, you can tell what the most important centers are because they have the most activations and the most things leading to the throat, or the most, you know what I mean? So the sacral has, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like 9, I think, gates that come out of it. A defined sacral is 66% of the population. So these people, and these are the ones that know the answer in the moment through an they have this constant buzz of genuine vitality that draws people toward them. They're just like a light. There's like a zzz.
That's definitely my job.
Yeah. So it's meant to only respond and never initiate. And then they have to trust that sacral response. So that's the hardest part, is trusting that their response is correct, or that going with that gut. And so when you have a defined sacral, you can go and you can do all the things, but you need to be doing things that are lighting that sacral up, and things that are truly an response for you, because if not, then just forget it.
And this is beautiful because John and I help each other with this stuff, and just in general, but knowing this information is even more insight to that. But like, since we met, and you and I were talking earlier, having all these conversations lately between us and our partners about codependency and where that might be still showing up, and so we talk about that all the time. And like, John is so much better now at saying no, and I'm getting better at saying no. Do you know what I mean? And so we just kind of encourage and remind each other, just because we know those things about each other.
Yeah.
He knows. He don't necessarily understand to the depth we do about what it means. Do you know what I mean? But
Isaac just calls everything Pluto being conjunct.
But he believes in it for sure. And he told me that when I came into his life again this last time, because it had been 20 years, that he was on this path where he had been single for a while, and he just felt like he was supposed to like just be doing, whatever center that was, that I said, that's totally John.
Yeah.
And here I come and I explained to him his birth chart, and it's everything that he had already been feeling. Do you know what I mean? For several years. And so yeah, it's been really helpful in our relationship as well, and just to be able to encourage each other in the spaces we know we struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have a defined sacral, I think I talked about this before, we talked about generators, manifesting generators, you need to be expending your sacral energy. And that is so true with children, because I have 2 defined sacral authority children, and if they don't get their energy moving throughout the day and I don't let them go, and like, you come over all the time, my kids are just outside, like they're just like running around, because I know that they have to expend that energy or they will be crazy people. And they will it'll come out in other ways, and it's usually like tantrums, or you know what I mean? So if you have generator kids, you have got to get them off the screens and out running around.
Playing at the park, playing in the yard.
Yes. Even if it's family jumping jacks, or get a Nintendo Wii or something, so that they can get some physical movement and activity, because that is very, very important for them to be like just completely exhausted when they go to bed at night. They'll just sleep way better. And so that brings us to the undefined or open sacral, which is 34% of the population, and that's mostly projectors and manifestors as well as reflectors. And this is where we're most vulnerable to intense conditioning because we have all these generators around us all the time, if you think about it. So we're 30% of the population, they're like 70% of the population. And so they make us feel all the time that that we're not doing enough and we need to be doing more and more and more and more and more. And so we don't often know when to quit. So we absorb all that sacral energy and we amplify it. And, so we can, projectors, like I said, or even manifestors, can seem like they can get things done at a faster pace or at a higher rate or at a better way or more efficient. Like I think of this with my landscaping jobs because I love them so much. I can go over and like whip out somebody's yard, which would take somebody else like maybe 2 days. I can do it in a day, but then I'm just totally wiped out for like 4 days. You know what I mean? And so it's knowing when to rest, knowing when enough is enough. And really, they say that people with open sacral should sleep by themselves. And this is a big bone of contention in my relationship because I was like, we're married, you're not sleeping by yourself. But I do take naps by myself, and so that's where we've compromised. But because when you're sleeping next to somebody with a defined sacral, you're still taking in all that sacral energy all night long.
I love sleeping next to John.
I know.
Like,
I know.
I didn't even like cuddling at all. Like, even my kids will tell you, like, I just has never been, like, a touchy-feely person. I mean, I'm better about it now that I've done some healing and stuff, but my whole family's been like that. My mom, my grandma would be like, oh, you gave me the EBGBs when you would hug her. So it was just inherited kind of thing. And so I just intentionally worked on that. And now, John, I probably because he makes me feel so safe.
Yeah.
But I love it. Like,
yeah.
I love just, like, sometimes at night he'll get up to use the bathroom and he's like, babe, I come back and you're, like, on my pillow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Me, because we still struggle with Emmy, sometimes comes in, so I have done 2 generators in my bed. And usually when she comes in is when I start to kind of get a little bit of interrupted sleep. But I do do a lot of other sacral clearing things like meditation. I take a lot of baths. Those are very good for clearing the sacral. But one thing about open sacral people is that they need to go to bed before they're actually tired. They don't sleep as well. It's like the opposite. If you're just totally zonked, you actually don't sleep as well. Whereas if you like allow yourself a chance to kind of like wind down and maybe read or have a cup of tea before bed, you will actually sleep much better. Like kind of phasing into it slowly as opposed to
like a little
being totally exhausted.
Comforting nighttime routine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. All right. So moving on, I want to talk about the emotional solar plexus last. So we're going to talk about the root center next. Actually, no, let's talk about the spleen. So the spleen is our first alarm system. It's like our thriving, our surviving. It's connected to the lymphatic system. And so the cells of the lymphatic system are like little sensors. They're constantly listening. It protects us from disease. It obviously rules the actual spleen, and then the T cells within our body. So like I mentioned, the spleen is it's all about fear, and it's fear or intuition. So it's just like this knowing. It's an awareness center. And so why don't you talk about how you feel your spleen, because you're a splenic authority.
I'm very easily overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I think it's because I grew up in such an environment where it was constant fear. And so I learned to respond to just everything because I was trying to prevent the inevitable conflict or whatever was coming. But I think, over time, just learning I'm not responsible for everything and learning to just get in touch with myself and my body, like we talked about, the meditation. And again, you talked about being hard to meditate, and Isaac and I have talked about this. And for me, the meditation, I'm not going to clear my head. I have the defined head. I have the defined ajna. So for me, it's more about the awareness of the thoughts that do come, and why are they there, and kind of dissecting them. So yeah, I think for me, I have to, whenever I get dysregulated, I guess, with the spleen, or whenever I feel fearful or anxious like that, just taking time to myself, taking time to regulate, and then listening from that point. What do I feel? Because there's a difference between fear and anxiety and intuition.
That's true.
And I think learning the difference between that spectrum has really helped me a lot.
Well, I think in modern times, and this is why we're actually moving kind of away from the center, it was very helpful when we were needing to like run from large animals.
Yeah.
Or needing to, protect ourselves from the elements, or a storm was coming, or, go find food that would lead us there too. It was great for that, but we have not gotten out of that fight or flight. And so we think like having to answer a phone call is the same thing as having to outrun a lion.
It's true, because I hate answering phone calls. Don't call me, just text me. Like, really, this couldn't have been an email.
I know,
like,
right? I feel you. I feel you there. But you know what I mean? It's interesting, because that is really what we're making the differentiation right now, is that, we don't have to be reactive. We can be responsive, and that's what comes from the emotional solar plexus center. But
practice the pause.
Yes.
Don't react.
Yes.
Pause and respond.
But the defined spleen is about 55% of people. So some of these, it's funny because like they're split more 50-50, whereas some are like way skewed.
Right.
And so it's interesting when you start to really break down human design, because this is just a very light sampling. I mean, if we could get way deeper. But when you start to think about, what rules each center, and what, how many people have them defined and why, and this and that. So defined spleens are responsible for our surviving and thriving with a sense of well-being. It manages instinct, intuition, and taste, and which are processes for discerning what is or isn't healthy for survival. So those with splenic authority must listen to their intuition. Defined spleens project a sense of well-being. They enjoy a strong immune system, living fully in the present moment, fully attuned. And so the defined spleen only knows the present moment. It only knows what's right for you at this time, this second, this second, this second. And so when we talk about splenic authority, we have to remember that, because we tend to think, because I felt this way one time, that's the truth for always, and it's not, because the whole situation could be, and so it could be different tomorrow. And so when we're talking about huge decisions in our life, and you have splenic authority, you really need to, like, I think, fall back on other authorities as well, because should I leave my partner in the middle of a huge fight? You might get a splenic yes from that, just because you're really super pissed off and you're in your fight or flight. Whereas if you've had a chance to feel into it later through like your emotional solar plexus center, then you can make a better decision.
Well, I think too it makes sense, right? Because we're talking about survival.
Right.
And if you're in the middle of like an argument, that survival is going to say, you should do that. Yes. So I think there's something to be said for that. And then the splenic authority, as you've explained it to me, you're supposed to go with that initial, like, knowing.
Yes.
But I think there's something to be said for if you're dysregulated, that there could be
That's correct.
You got to regulate first and then go with that splenic authority, because if you make a space in dysregulation, it's really just about survival. It's not about what you should actually do.
Yeah, you want to be, if you're afraid, if fear is the thing that's being expressed from your spleen, then you know that you're not on the right path. It should be, you're just an intuitive knowing. It's like a calm, like, yep, I know this is the right thing. I mean, I do it a lot of times I use my spleen, like I said, to like order food, or to, pick out things that I feel like are good in the grocery store, or to, and human design, you can go way deep and like learn about like what kind of foods you should eat and all kinds of stuff. We're not going to get into that there, but one of splenic people tend to have what's called open taste, which is where they are just meant to eat things that are like in season and are, not a lot of like processed food, because they have a very primal old system. So splenic people are some of the older systems, if that makes sense, because the spleen was what we needed for survival back then.
So is that why every time I try to go vegan, my stuff just gets all messed up?
Probably.
Because I can't do vegan. Like, I have tried, my vitamins are off, my minerals go off, my labs are terrible.
Me too.
I can go where I eat like meatless a couple nights a week, and
Right.
I do okay. But if I try to give up meat completely, I am a mess.
Yes. Well, human design, actually, we're going to be with the shift in the energy field again in 2027. We are going to be making more and more moves toward meat free, just as a collective, because it's more sustainable. And so, but we have needed it as part of our diet for grounding. And so, but we are not going to be needing it.
Just morally and ethically, I want to do it. I want to,
you.
you know what I
I'm
mean?
with you there.
Oh, but every time I try, it's like I said, I
Yes.
get real sick.
And also, it's incredibly expensive and not really
No, that's
as
true.
much.
Yeah.
It's not, at least for more convenience type vegan foods. I mean, yeah, if you're we can make, I guess, roasted chickpeas every single day.
Who's the energy for that as a projector?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but yeah, I hear you there. I'm with you. I went not full vegan, but I was vegetarian for about 9 months, back about 2 years ago. And yeah, I started losing hair and stuff like that. It was just not right for me, but.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the undefined spleen is about 45%. One more thing I want to say about a defined spleen is that people feel very safe with people that have defined spleens. So, like, if you have an undefined, like, I can tell this with my kids. Elena has an undefined spleen, and she always tells me, she's like, Mom, when you hold my hand, it makes me feel very safe. Like, she just has that where, like, when they feel afraid of things, I'm the one that they come to first, because I have that defined spleen. They just feel that protection, that I'm going to be able to protect them from danger.
That makes so much sense, because people used to always come to my house and like easily fall asleep or feel comfortable and be like, and I don't know what it is, but I feel so comfortable over here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So an undefined spleen, like I said, is 45% of the population. And there are 7 primal fears that live in the spleen. And so when they're undefined, these fears are magnified. And so those with undefined spleens need to face the fears one by one in order to become fearless in a healthy way. Undefined spleens have an inherent fear that they aren't equipped for earthly survival. They're also like open and sensitive to a lack of well-being in the world. They seek out defined spleens and cling to them. They hold on to things that aren't good for them for too long. And it also can give them a false sense of security. And they're usually the first person to get sick. So with an undefined spleen, their biggest issue, I think, is that they tend to hold on to the past a lot. They bring up things that happened in the past. They define one thing that might have happened a long time ago as something that's going to happen again and again and again. And then of course they deal with all of these like fears.
I was going to say that's very fear-based thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's very true with an defined spleen, is because they're absorbing all of this fear energy, right? And especially nowadays. And so I can tell just in the difference, because Isaac has his spleen undefined. And in our parenting, he is much more of the helicopter parent than I am, because he's got a lot more of those.
Fear of, yeah.
And I'm just more, they'll be all right. Everything, I have that awareness about me to just kind of know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cool how it shows up in different areas.
So John has an undefined spleen. So he may hold on to, relationships and health patterns and things like that that are not good for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This relationship, again, his Chiron's in the relationship house, and he's in his Chiron return. So I think that's why we came together when we did. But this relationship has taught him differently, right? Like we talk about these things, but the fact that he notices those patterns in himself, I don't know where that comes from, but he does have his moon conjunct Pluto, and maybe that depends on where it falls in his human design. I'd have to go look, but he's starting to notice patterns where he's
Yeah.
done that, where he's held on to things like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's the first part is awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to the root. So your root is like your purest, most powerful energy. It's your adrenal system. It's your production of stress hormone. Cortisol comes from the root. It's a pressure center and a motor, but it's only like an on and off switch. So it's either on and you're getting things done and going. It's your root energy is what like if you think about it, like blast off, it makes you like get up off the couch and go do something, or get up and go mow the lawn, or go do this. It's what pressures you. So 60% of the population have defined roots, and which this means that they have a fixed way of dealing with stress. It can be connected to 3 different centers, right? So the root can either be connected to like the sacral center, or it can be connected to the spleen center, or it can be connected to the emotional solar plexus. So kind of depending on how your root is connected is how that energy is going to go. So if you're defined to your emotion, your root pressure energy is going to cause you to act on emotional type situations, or even sexual situations, because that's kind of the mix between the sacral and root and emotional all around there. And then, or there's like the root defined to the spleen, which is like the pressure to survive, the correct what isn't working.
Isn't that the 2 you have?
I do.
Yeah.
Yep. I have one. But there's 3 channels, and when we get into channels and gates and things like that, maybe in a later episode, we'll talk about how, depending on the channel, it's either representative of tribal energy, individual energy, or collective energy. But so there's 3 gates, and the ones that are on the outermost are collective energy. And so I have a collective energy gate 1858, which is the gate the joyous is what it's called. It's like moving toward joy, correcting things to move toward joy. But it's what gets me going, is to correct things. It can be a rough energy actually sometimes, but so like if it's defined to the emotional solar plexus, there's a fixed way of dealing with emotional stress. So there's like your physical primal stress, there's stress that would come from like working, and then stress that comes like from emotion. So depending on where the root is going out will depend on how you manage that. So defined root, also people have a like very good sense of timing, and they just have like a natural knowing of how to time things and plan, whereas undefined, and I think you and I talked about this, tend to be on everybody else's schedule.
Yes, but you made me aware of that, and that is changing.
Yeah, that's good. So an undefined root is 40% of the population. They absorb environmental stress by those with defined roots, but they're not equipped to handle the pressure for extended periods of time. So over time, this conditioning by defined roots can lead to restlessness, inability to focus. It can be like ADHD sometimes. You have to understand like what is your own pressure and what is the pressure of others to get things done. So undefined roots, like I said, because they don't have necessarily that internal clock, so to speak, it can either cause them to get into like procrastination because they need to like build up that root pressure to actually push them to get up and do something.
That's me.
Okay. Or the opposite is that they feel so much pressure that they have to get the thing done right away, or they will only think about it and obsess over it all the time until they get it done.
Oh, mine's definitely procrastination.
Okay.
My son told me the other day that's where he gets it from.
He may get it from his root definition or lack thereof. So,
Oh, Zach, he was like, Mom, I think
Zach,
I get my
you
procrastination.
actually inherit your human design from your grandparents. So that's where you got it from. Anyway.
There are certain times where I feel the pressure to get up and do it right now, or I can't get anything else done. That can be true, but I would say more so in the past it's been procrastination.
And see, for me, because I have a defined root, I and but Zach has a defined root too. But again, we're all subject to conditioning though. But because I have a defined route, I can also put things off because I know in my mind I can get it done. And sometimes, like I like that extra pressure. But then other times, I also can manage. I feel like I can manage stressful situations too a little bit better because I have a defined route. Like I know things will be. I know everything tomorrow is going to be different. So yeah, with if you have an undefined route though, just be very mindful of being on other people's time clocks and schedules and wanting them to move you around and direct that route energy. All right, last we're going to move on to the emotional solar plexus. So this is our emotional and social awareness. It's our passion, desire, abundance of spirit. It's our feelings, our moods, our sensitivities. It's both a motor and an awareness center. If you have your emotional solar plexus defined, you are automatically an emotional authority. It controls the lungs, kidneys, pancreas, prostate glands, nervous system. It's a very potent energy that drives human cycles. And so there's, like I talked about, there's different waves depending on what channels you have from your emotional solar plexus. And so the emotional solar plexus is a very important because it correlates to the third chakra. Because we judge emotional energy so much, it's the path of lifetime for us to learn to embrace emotional energy. And so, and work with it and see it for what it is and not be afraid of it and not be reactive to it.
Yeah, if you're of the mind that it's about your thoughts and not your feelings, then why is everybody so afraid of feelings?
Yeah, no kidding. We have whole attachment styles to get away from feeling things.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And so there's, like I talked about, the tribal and individual and collective circuitry. That also comes into play very much so in the waves of the emotional solar plexus. So tribal is there's two channels that are tribal within the emotional solar plexus, and that is driven by need. And so those waves can they come up up and down, up and down, up and down, but still kind of like the stock market, it goes up and down, up and down, and up and down, but still overall upward trend. But then there's a big correction, and then it starts its pattern again of up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, but still up, and then a big correction, and so on. Whereas this individual, which is like the channel 2212 or 3955, this individual wave, if you have that channel, it's more of a solid baseline with a bloop up if you're having a really creative, inspired moment, and then a solid baseline, and then up you might have a couple down melancholy days and bloop down. It doesn't necessarily affect as much of your environment if it's an individual. It's more like your internal. Whereas if you have collective, it's more these huge waves of, you're really super passionate and just going toward this collective goal or whatever, and then either you achieve what you do or whatever, and then it kind of drops off, and then you build it up again. So it's knowing and understanding how your waves, your emotional waves operate, and understanding what gates are activated and where those gates are coming or going to or coming from is very important. And like I said, when you have an open or an undefined solar plexus and you're in the presence of defined solar plexuses, it can be intense. But so defined solar plexus people, that's 53% of people. Um, Basically, their one thing they need to learn is that there is no truth in the now. That truth reveals itself over time. So anyone with, like I said, with defined has an emotional authority. Their feelings become kind of their authoritative guide. These people must ride their waves before making decisions, and awareness comes as clarity at the end of the decision wave, or I mean, the end of the wave, emotional wave. So knowing what is correct for them takes time. These people are very insightful. Their understanding of emotions comes from referencing a time that they felt the same. So when you have a defined solar plexus, you are able to feel for other people, but you can only feel for other people by referencing a time in your past that you felt, because you're in your own emotional wave. You're not influenced, you're not absorbing anybody else's really emotional energy.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so you're not able to really feel what people are feeling in the moment. And so defined emotional people are not really like empaths. They're not who we would consider an empath. It's the undefined emotions that are empaths, because we are absorbing people's emotional energy and amplifying it out. And so, unfortunately, open emotional undefined solar plexuses, this is 47%. So this is another one that's kind of 50-50, and it's meant, you think the 50-50, okay, we're meant to learn from each other a lot.
Oh,
here,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's, a smaller amount, you're kind of meant to learn maybe from the smaller. Anyway, so the undefined solar plexus absorbs and amplifies emotions into the environment. This center is especially likely to be conditioned. Those with undefined solar plexuses are the true empaths, being able to physically feel the pain of others in the present moment.
That's so true, because I can't tell you how many times you and I have talked about this, where I can hear a story. It could be something I've never been through and could never imagine going through, but I feel just by hearing the
And
story.
It makes you cry?
I will cry and feel as if I actually went
Yes.
through that thing.
Me too.
Yeah.
So open centers are like windows. So it's meant to like sample the emotional field, but not personalize it. Unfortunately, we tend to personalize it because we're actually physically feeling it, and so it's hard to not think that it's our feelings, but it's not. So these people tend to hate confrontation. They often will do everything they can to avoid confrontation. Even the thought of confrontation can be terrifying to them. But in order to access life's full range of pleasures, we have to be able to feel. And we have to be able to manage our emotions. And so this tendency, and often people with open emotional solar plexuses have this tendency of needing to avoid difficult things, and so that everyone will be happy, and they get into this codependency cycle, which you and I were talking about earlier, where you're doing things to try to control the emotional environment in your house.
Yeah, to prevent things that haven't even happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of because your own past trauma is creating situations or creating stories, and causing you to live outside of your.
Oh, I find myself doing it with John. Like John encourages me to rest and encourages me, like all the things that you would want your partner to encourage and understand. But because my ex-husband didn't do that, and my childhood wasn't like that, because I was expected to perform and to prevent.
Yes.
And with John, I don't have to, and I have to catch myself going, no, it's actually okay if I lay down right now. Like John would be like, yeah, go take a nap. You know what I mean? But in my head, it's like, oh, I better do this and this and this so I don't upset him, or so that nobody's walking on eggshells. And he's just he's not that person.
I know. And it's so hard because it's like, yeah, even though we've been this way, we've been in these relationships for some years, like, yeah, but I've been the other way for like 40 years.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a hard habit to break, and it's a hard thing to not fall into that codependent. And, I really want to talk more about codependence and interdependence and that kind of thing, and attachment styles in relationships, because I think it is so important. And there's ways that we don't even realize that we're doing it.
Oh, not only that, but it's so in line with the astrology and human design right now.
Yes,
to talk about this stuff and to understand it, especially with the North nodes right now in Aries and Libra.
Yes.
And I love the human design. Just to give you guys a concept, like if you know the astrology, that's great. Or like I'm big on astrology, love it, as you guys know. Right. But I so enjoyed this conversation because now I've kind of got a better grasp on like what some of the human design is and so forth. And knowing where those are falling in those human design gates is so helpful, because you can go back and look at your human design chart and say, well, this is where it's at. Do you know what I mean? And so it's been, I would totally have that conversation. And we can just have the conversation, and we can also relate it, if you want, to the human design and astrology, because it's totally, full moon in Aries is about sovereignty. Mm-hmm. But also, this idea that, the North Node is where we're supposed to go, and we're supposed to leave the South Node behind. That's not the case. And so the South Node in Libra would be more about leaving behind what doesn't work with relationships, not leaving behind everything, right? And so, yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you very much for joining us on the Projector Planet podcast. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Projector Planet podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. This will guarantee you stay up to date on what next week's energy will bring. If you feel called to leave us a review to help the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again, and we will see you next week for more astrological and human design forecasts.